Practitioners, in a previous video, I went over one significant reason why salivary cortisol testing is not accurate, and I don't think it should be used in a clinical nutrition practice or functional medicine practice. In today's video, I'm going to cover two more distinct ways, and quite honestly, the last way I think is a nail in the coffin for the salivary adrenal cortisol test. Let's take a look. All right, so previously we talked about three reasons why, and the first one was the accuracy of the cortisol awakening response in another video. Right now, we're going to look at the accuracy of the diurnal rhythm. Now, for those of you, I'm sure probably all of you know by now, but there's a diurnal rhythm, circadian rhythm to cortisol. It's highest typically when we first wake up in the morning, goes down progressively throughout the day, and then starts to go up as we're sleeping during the evening. Now, one of the arguments for the 4-point salivary cortisol test is that you can capture this diurnal rhythm, which you can, but how accurate is it? Well, let's look at a couple of papers here. Individual differences in the diurnal cycle of cortisol. In 109 healthy community residents, 34 of them, which was 31%, showed different diurnal patterns on 2 days. Now, they did salivary testing for 2 days on these people, and I just want to show you how inconsistent some of these cycles can be. Now, if you've ever done the adrenal cortisol test, if you saw this one here, or you saw this one here, and you thought they were different people, you would give completely different interpretations and completely different protocols based on them. The question is when somebody does a salivary cortisol test in your practice, what day are you looking at? What's going on with them? Here's another paper. Diurnal cycles of salivary cortisol in older adults. 48 community-dwelling older adults collected saliva every 2 hours over a 3-day period to look at the cortisol, the diurnal rhythm. And 48%, almost half, had inconsistent cycles. That means that if 10 people come into your practice and you have them do this test, half of them might have an inconsistent cycle, and you don't know if that's their normal rhythm or not. So just as another example, here is one person on the cycle with the dots here, and then we're looking at the squares. Similar patterns, high in the morning, low in the evening, but there's some differences in these. And again, you look at these, you might interpret them different and put different results on them. We looked at the cortisol awakening response. That doesn't appear to be very accurate. We just looked at the accuracy of the diurnal circadian rhythm. I don't think that that's very accurate either. But the real nail in the coffin to me is this one here, and it's the accuracy of day-to-day cortisol variation. So let's take a look at that. This was a paper that looked at 3 different papers, looking at day-to-day variation in cortisol levels. You can take a look at the paper if you want. But they said collectively, the finding of these 3 papers that they looked at suggests that at least in healthy populations, the HPA axis is best viewed as a dynamic system whose activity changes substantially from day to day. Now, we need to take that into consideration. Now, this is the big one. Day-to-day variation in saliva cortisol, relation with sleep, stress, and self-rated health. Now, here's what they did. For 4 consecutive weeks, they took 14 people, and they provided saliva samples at awakening. 15 minutes after awakening, it should have been 30. And at bedtime. Now, I want you to take a look at these results. Now, before I say this, there's many papers that do these kind of things. This paper showed the data, okay? So let's take a look at this data. Over here on the left-hand side, you have the 14 people. Then you have their awakening, 15-minute, and bedtime levels. They have the mean or average for that one person over this 4-week period of time, as well as the max and minimum. And I want you to take a look at this. So awakening cortisol levels on average for this person was 8. Here's another 8.8. There's another one that's 8.1. But in those individuals, look at this. The average was 8. This person's max, though, was 21, almost 22. And the minimum was 1.4. Okay? When you're doing the test on this person, what day of the week are they? What's happening? What level are you getting? And how accurate is that really? In a previous video, I talked about trait-like cortisol response. This person has low awakening cortisol, but you wouldn't have caught that on the day that they particularly had this high one. Similarly, if you look at the 15-minute and bedtime, again, you can pause this video and take a look at these things. But the max and the minimum for each one of these individual people is tremendous. So when you have your patient do a salivary cortisol test, looking at the diurnal rhythm, looking at their cortisol levels, how accurate is it? And there's a really strong chance just looking at these numbers. Look at people going to bed. This high, this low, averaged out here. Again, pause the video and take a look at all this data. The reality is day-to-day cortisol has massive variations for most people. And if you do a single-day cortisol test, whether it's urinary or salivary, chances are you're not going to capture who that person really is. So, accuracy of the cortisol awakening response, not good. How about diurnal circadian rhythm? There's inconsistencies there. And how about day to day variation? I think that's the nail in the coffin. The salivary adrenal test just is not accurate. So, my summary is salivary cortisol is accurate at testing cortisol, but it's momentary cortisol for that particular moment or day. A single day sample is not accurate in evaluating the trait like cortisol patterns because of the variation that people have. The only way that salivary or urinary cortisol should be used in practice is by collecting numerous samples. In the previous video, they said 6 consecutive days. And these ones you saw, they took it for a darn month. Otherwise, there's too much variation to justify its use in a functional medicine or clinical practice. But that's just how I read the evidence. I'd love to hear what you think. And when you're done with that, head over to Clinicians Code, where we have these kind of conversations and a lot more while we help practitioners build confidence, cut overwhelm, and become more successful in functional medicine.